His eyes darkened the moment I stepped into the room. The silk clung to me like a secret, and I knew he remembered, that one night, that one dress. His jaw tensed, hands curling into fists by his side, like he was fighting himself. But I wore it for him. Only him. And the way he looked at me? God, it was like he wanted to devour every inch of the memory we never talked about. Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never meant to make it complicated. It was just a dress, elegant, black, low-cut in the back with a slit that kissed the top of my thigh. But the moment I slipped it on, I remembered everything. The night we weren't supposed to want each other. The way Al had looked at me then, like I was the last light in a room full of shadows. And now, years later, married, living in the cold routine of ordinary days, I wore that same dress again. Not for nostalgia. Not for comfort. I wore it because I needed to know if he still felt it, if we still burned. Al was quiet when he saw me. He didn't say anything at first, just stared. The air between us buzzed, hot and tense. We'd been together for almost 6 years. Love? Yes. Routine? Absolutely. Passion? That was harder to admit. But I caught it, that flicker in his eyes, the same one I'd seen the night he first kissed me against the balcony door, with city lights blinking behind him and my breath catching like fire in my chest. We were supposed to go to his friend's engagement dinner. That was the plan. But standing there, his tie undone, his fingers twitching like he wanted to touch me and couldn't decide if he should, I knew we were rewriting something. Something dangerous. Something fragile. And then he said it. Low, like a dare. You wore that for me. Not a question. A statement. My answer came in a half smile and a silence heavy with history. That dress had once slipped off my shoulder and pooled at my feet while we pretended nothing about us was wrong. Back when we were only friends. Back when he was someone else's fiancé. And now we were married. Now the past shouldn't matter. But it did. Because I wasn't sure he ever stopped loving the version of me from that night. I watched him cross the room slowly, tension in every step. He touched my waist like it was unfamiliar. Like he didn't trust himself. Al, I whispered, not sure if I was warning him or inviting him closer. And just as he leaned in, his lips barely grazing my ear, the doorbell rang. He didn't move when the doorbell rang. Neither did I. For a few suspended seconds, we stood locked in a silence so loud it drowned out everything else. I could feel the weight of his stare pressing into my spine, a heat I hadn't felt in so long it startled me. My pulse fluttered, wild and foolish. And I hated that I wanted him to say something. Or do something. Anything but stand there looking like he regretted everything we weren't allowed to talk about. The chime echoed again, sharper this time. I turned, brushing past him, careful not to let our skin touch. My hand lingered on the doorknob. I didn't want to open it. Whoever was on the other side didn't matter. Not compared to what had almost happened. But I did open it. It was Mark, Al's best friend, the one who always showed up early to everything. He greeted me with that wide, easy smile that usually felt harmless. Tonight, it made my stomach twist. Because his eyes flicked over me, down the curve of the dress, and lingered just a second too long. And Al saw it. I felt him stiffen behind me. Wow. You look. Mark said, then cleared his throat awkwardly. Amazing. I laughed, soft and empty. Thanks. Behind me, I heard Al walk away, his footsteps heavier than they needed to be. I closed the door and followed him into the hallway, watching him grab his jacket with more force than necessary. He didn't look at me. I told you that dress was trouble, he said, finally. I swallowed. And yet. I wore it anyway. He turned to face me. There was something wounded in his eyes, something angry. Why? I should have lied. Said it was for fun. Said it was for me. But I didn't. Instead, I said the truth neither of us had the courage to face all these years. Because I needed to remember who we were before we became this. He stared at me, unmoving. I didn't know if he was about to kiss me or walk away. And the worst part? I wasn't sure which one would hurt more. Al didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stood there, back half turned, shoulders tight like he was holding back something that might rip him apart if he let it out. I watched the way his fingers flexed at his sides, like he wanted to reach for something but didn't know how anymore. Or maybe he did, and didn't trust himself with it. I wanted to say something to pull him back, but the words in my throat were jagged, stuck somewhere between guilt and longing. He finally exhaled. So that's what we are now? Memories and costumes? I flinched. No, but we're not exactly honest either, are we? He turned then, and it hit me, how exhausted he looked. Not physically, but emotionally. Like he'd been walking through fog for years and just realized how lost he was. His eyes weren't angry. They were hurt. And that hurt me more than if he'd yelled. You think I don't remember who we were? He asked quietly. You think I forgot what that night meant? I never forgot. That's the problem. My breath caught. My fingers curled into the side of the dress like it might anchor me to something solid. Then why didn't we ever talk about it? Why did we pretend that night didn't change everything? Because I was engaged, he snapped, and then immediately softened. Because I was stupid. And by the time I wasn't, we were already married, and I didn't want to break the version of us we built. I moved closer, not touching him, just letting the silence fill the space between us again. It didn't feel like the kind of quiet that brought peace. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm that hadn't finished with us yet. Do you still want me? I asked, not hiding behind any soft words. He looked at me like he wanted to say no. Like he needed to say no. But his silence said everything. Before he could answer, Mark's voice carried from the living room. You guys almost ready? Traffic's gonna suck. We both froze. AL's jaw clenched. We should go. I nodded, but neither of us moved right away. Because we both knew, this wasn't over. This wasn't resolved. It was just delayed. As we finally stepped out the door, the night air was thick and heavy, like it too had secrets it was holding. And deep down, I wasn't sure if we were walking into a dinner party, or the end of whatever illusion we had left. The restaurant was full of laughter and clinking glasses, but we were just two ghosts pretending to be part of it. Al sat beside me, close enough that our arms brushed every time I shifted, but far enough that it felt like miles. Mark was across the table, smiling too much, talking too loud, and I couldn't focus on anything he said. Not with Al's hand resting so still on the linen, fingers drumming once, twice, then stopping completely when my knee accidentally touched his. He didn't pull away. I didn't either. The candlelight danced between us, flickering against the tension we hadn't escaped. Every glance Al threw my way felt heavier, slower, like he was fighting the same war I was inside. And the worst part? We were losing. Not to each other. But to what we remembered. He leaned in slightly, under the noise, voice low against the chaos. You keep looking at me like you want to say something. I do, I whispered back, my lips barely moving. But not here. His jaw ticked. He looked down at his untouched drink and then at me, really looked. Like he didn't know whether to kiss me or get up and walk out of the room. We were surrounded by people, yet it felt like we were alone in a glass box, and every word, every movement, echoed louder than it should. His fingers brushed mine under the table for the briefest second. Just once. And it was enough to set every nerve in my body on fire. Mark raised his glass for a toast. I barely heard what it was about. Al didn't raise his. Neither did I. Instead, our eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between us. Something fragile, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. I reached for my water, hand trembling just enough for Al to notice. His eyes dropped to my fingers, lingered, then lifted back to my face. And I saw it. That look. The one from the night I wore this dress the first time. Something was going to happen. I didn't know when or how. But it was already too late to pretend it wasn't coming. Mark leaned back in his chair, laughing about something Al didn't seem to hear. I watched him, the way his knuckles were white against the wine glass, the way he hadn't looked at me since that last glance. Something had shifted. I could feel it in the way my heart started to race without knowing why. Then Mark leaned across the table, voice lowered like a secret but not quiet enough. You know, he said, grinning at Al, you should have seen how she used to look at me back in the day. Before you two figured yourselves out. The words landed like a slap. Al froze, his eyes finally meeting mine, but not with heat this time, just cold. Mark chuckled, completely unaware. Or maybe not. Remember that New Year's party? Mark continued, like he was flipping through old photos we'd buried. She wore that same dress. You were still dating Rachel. And he looked at me with a smirk, let's just say we had a moment. Al stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor, catching the attention of the nearby tables. His jaw was tight, eyes locked on Mark with a kind of anger I hadn't seen in him before, not even that night, years ago, when he told me he was breaking off his engagement. That's enough, Al said, voice quiet but sharp. Mark blinked, then laughed awkwardly. Relax, man. I'm just messing around. We were all a little messy back then. No, Al said, his eyes flicking to me again. You don't get to talk about her like that. Not now. Not ever. I couldn't breathe. The tension was no longer subtle. It was suffocating. People were looking at us. The table had turned cold. Mark raised his hands in surrender. All right. Didn't mean to start anything. But something had started. Or maybe something finally cracked. I stood slowly, needing to move, needing air. Al followed, his hand brushing the small of my back, a protective gesture that only confused me more. Outside, the night was cool, the air sharp. I leaned against the railing outside the restaurant, gripping the edge like it might keep me grounded. Al stood beside me in silence, then asked, did something happen with him? I looked at him, heart pounding. Does it matter? It does now. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't just about the dress or the past or even what we'd buried. This was about everything we never said, finally clawing its way to the surface. The city buzzed around us, but I only heard his breathing, shallow, uneven, like mine. The streetlight above flickered once, then held steady, casting a halo around us in the quiet just after the storm. Al turned to me, and for a second, he didn't say anything. His silence said more than words ever could. But then he finally broke. I didn't want to know, he said. About Mark. About that night. Because deep down, I knew something happened. And I didn't want it to ruin the way I saw you. I stared at him, feeling that old ache resurface. It was one kiss, I said, voice low. He kissed me. I didn't kiss him back. I walked away. And I told myself it didn't count because I was already in love with you. Al blinked, something shifting in his eyes. You were? I still am. That was it. That was the crack that broke everything open. His face fell, all that anger melting into something deeper, relief, regret, maybe even hope. He stepped closer, hands finding my waist with the kind of careful reverence that felt like an apology. "I never stopped loving you," he said, barely above a whisper. "But I got scared. Scared we were just surviving. And then tonight, you put that dress on, and I remembered what it felt like to want you, not just need you." I leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest. "I wanted you to remember. I wanted to remember too." And then he kissed me. Not rushed. Not possessive. Just full, of everything we hadn't said, hadn't touched, hadn't dared admit. Right there under the flickering streetlight, with the past behind us and the truth finally between us. But just as I exhaled, ready to fall completely into him, my phone buzzed. A message. From Mark. "You didn't tell him everything." Al felt me tense. Pulled back just slightly. "What is it?" I met his eyes. "Nothing," I said. But in my heart, I knew that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a truth I hadn't yet found the courage to tell. Al read the message. I didn't stop him. We stood frozen in that thin sliver of space where everything can fall apart or fall into place. His eyes scanned the words, then found mine. Not angry. Not betrayed. Just, waiting. "I didn't tell you everything," I admitted quietly. Because it felt like admitting it would ruin the one part of us that was still good. He didn't flinch. "Tell me now." I nodded, the air between us suddenly thinner. "Mark didn't just kiss me. He told me he was going to tell you about it the night you proposed." I begged him not to. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I was afraid you'd think I was something I'm not. I didn't want a mistake to rewrite everything we were becoming. Al took that in slowly. "Then, and why now? Why wear the dress?" "Because I needed to know if you still saw me. Not just the wife who makes coffee in the morning or forgets to fold the towels. The woman you couldn't stop looking at the night we weren't supposed to happen." He stepped closer. "I never stopped seeing her. I just stopped letting myself look." I breathed out, the weight finally falling away. "So now what?" "We stop pretending," he said. "No more secrets. No more silences. If we're going to make it through the rest of our life together, it can't be built on what we don't say." I smiled then, small, real. "I can live with that." He took my hand, threading his fingers through mine like he was choosing me again. Not the version of me from the past, but the woman standing in front of him now. And as we walked home, side by side under a sky smeared with city light and memories, I realized something. I wore that dress for him because I needed to remember the fire. But he looked at me like he finally knew how to keep it burning. The same dress. The same tension. But this time, he didn't fight it. He let it become part of us. He didn't just see the woman from that night. He saw me. And this time, he didn't have to control himself. He chose to love me instead.